Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Heallist Podcast. We have a thought-provoking conversation for you today. And if this resonates, please hit subscribe or follow wherever you are listening. It's a small and simple way to support this type of independent and free content. Highly appreciate it. And today we're talking about the art of channeling, and we have an incredible guest to give us a glimpse into those skills and this really fascinating modality. So, Dr. Yafi Yair is a clinical psychologist, a multidimensional channel, and author who bridges science with the unseen realms. And with over 2 decades of experience, she delivers profound guidance on consciousness, healing, and humanity's evolution. Dr. Yafi, it's so amazing to have you with us today. I'm really curious about our conversation, and as somebody who's been exploring a lot of the spiritual topics and teachings and reading some of the channeled books, I define myself as a student who's someone who wants to learn more about somebody like yourself, and especially someone who comes from more of a scientific background, right? I'm curious to learn about your story. How did it come about? How did it start? And also, what is it, channeling? So maybe we start from the very foundational beginning. What is it that you do for somebody who's completely new to the spiritual teachings, but really curious? How would you describe it?
Yes. First of all, hi, Yuli. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Now, what is channeling? You're probably going to get different answers depending who you ask. And there are probably many, many different answers that are all equally correct. But from my perspective, channeling is when I open myself up. So my consciousness overlaps with the consciousness of something else beyond. So the overlap part is really important. So I am not completely out of the picture. I am not possessed or asleep or gone in any way. But it's also not just me, just Yafi in my usual regular state. There is an overlap. Now, for this overlap to happen, I need to put myself in a certain state. I need to do certain things to make it happen. And it can get more complicated than that. Of course, the more you break down the process and the person, and the more questions you ask, the more answers you get that lead to more questions. But the very, very, very basic idea is that there is this overlap of consciousness, of essence that is shared and that is get to be expressed verbally. So that is when we talk about channeling, when we talk about verbal channeling, because channeling doesn't have to be verbal, lingual messages, but in this case, that's what we're talking about. So that's what it is. There's this idea that we're all one, right? So on some level, we're all one. We're all different aspects, different emanations of source. So that's the idea of what is other. We're channeling something that is more than just us, that is other. And there's also the idea that many channelers, me included, many of the sources that we channel, especially if it's a source that we channel regularly. So I have the availability, the flexibility to channel many, 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 many sources. However, as someone that has been doing it for years, for several years, there are certain sources that become very significant, that come up again and again and again. There's some kind of a closer relationship. And what comes up usually in those cases that these are other aspects of the self. So you can see it as another incarnation or another lifetime of the oversoul. So there are different verbiage to express it, but different aspect, different lifetime of myself. And for different channelers, it's true about themselves. So a lot of people know the name Daryl Enka. He's channeling Bashar. So he says, or Bashar says through him, that Bashar is the same soul as Daryl, but they're living different lives. So you can understand Bashar is a future lifetime of Daryl. But in their realms, time is not linear like ours. So when we say future life, past life, parallel lives, these are terms to help us with our human brain to understand what we're talking about. So when we're talking about channeling, you can channel different aspects of yourself, different guides. What I've learned, one of the things that I've learned through this fascinating journey of becoming a channeler and channeling different sources, how wide range are the conscious of what can be channeled. So I'll give you an example. In my first book, Conversations with the Earth, it was really documenting my path as a beginner channeler. So I channeled many, many, many different sources. But sources that before that, I didn't even realize that could be channeled. So the first chapter is fire consciousness. So I actually channeled the element of fire, that consciousness. It's really mind-boggling. And the more left brain you are, the more mind-boggling it is. And for me, it really was. It was really difficult to wrap my head around. What does it mean that it can actually communicate with us? What does it mean that it can communicate in way of words? So there are all this unraveling of what channeling is, what can be channeled, the extent of what can be channeled. And to make it even more complex, but I feel make more sense. What recently came through in a conversation exactly about this topic of what is channeling and what does it mean we're channeling other, but is that other actually us? Like how to put it all together. And what came up is that channeling is that integration or that overlap with other. The reason that it's other, it's because it's a part of ourselves that has not been integrated yet. So it's true that we're all one, but we haven't integrated that. We're still living very separate lives of little individual dots and as a part of the big matrix. And any of that dot that we still perceive as separate from us on some level, as other than us on some level, that is what other means in that way.
Can you try to give us some scientific explanation of what you just described? Of what that other, what you call it, entity or the other being, if you had to explain it from, let's say, quantum physics, or if you're comfortable getting there. But I do think part of me, I understand it intuitively, but part of me wants to dig deeper. Okay, for somebody who is a left brain listener right now, can you put it into a little bit more scientific terms so they can relate as well?
Yes, so I don't know if it would help, honestly, because quantum physics doesn't really make sense, right? When you really delve into it, there's a reason. It really is the merging of consciousness with physical reality. Yes. Speaking scientifically, we then go into the idea that the world is holographic, that our reality is holographic in nature. And what it means is that it's all made out of fractals. So fractals, for people who don't know what it means, it's the idea that certain pattern can be found on different scales. So if you look at the tree, you have the general biggest scale, the most general, which is the trunk and some branches. And then you can zoom in on a branch and you have the same shape now. We have a branch and smaller branches. And then you can zoom in on a smaller branch and you have the same pattern, the same shape. You have the smaller branch and smaller, I don't know the words for that, even smaller branches, and so forth and so forth. So you have that repetition of that same pattern, the same shape. That's a fractal. And in quantum physics, we understand that the world is a fractal, which means that whenever you look at a smaller portion, it still includes all the information. Another example of that is the cell of the body. Each cell of our body, whether it's a skin cell or a bone cell or eye or whatever it is, has the DNA of our whole existence, which really doesn't make sense. It only makes sense because of the holographic understanding that, because if it has all this information, how does it know what to do? How does it know what to be? So that is actually a really, really good question. But the idea is that all the information is contained even in the small, small portion, like one cell. The whole information of the whole system is included. So applying that to the understanding of humanity and to existence of different beings of us, we are a tiny aspect of the whole, and we can call that whole God. But if you're having a negative reaction to the word God, many people do because of organized religion, you can call it all that is, you can call it source, whatever words resonate with you and do not evoke resistance. So you have that essence of everything, and then you have little facets of everything, like us. We are a little facet of everything. And because the world, the nature of reality is holographic, there is the whole of information in each little everything, including us. Now, if everything is everywhere, how do we know what's our unique place, like a cell? How does a cell know what it's doing, what to do? And there's the idea of shape, of movement that gives function. And each of us, although we have the information of everything, our focus, our awareness is only the tiny, tiny aspect that's relevant for us. And it's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the whole. But a part of our human evolution, path, journey, goal, design is to move towards integration, integrating more and more and more of our parts in quantum physics, meaning resonating with more and more and more aspects of that whole, of that general hologram.
Listen, I can talk about quantum physics all day, so I love that to bring to infuse a little bit of that into our conversation. But as somebody who's coming from a psychology background, can you maybe that would be an easier way to connect the dots, and maybe we can dive a little bit into your personal story, right? Going from that background and doing what you do today. I think that would be really fascinating to know.
Yeah, I think the common thread really is the passion for human awareness, human potential, for consciousness, which for me, in my psychological makeup, there's a huge overlap and is very connected. And I know that it's not only me. There are other channelers actually with some background in therapy or psychology. There's also connection to acting. So it seems not connected, but it's really connected. And when you think about the love and the passion, again, for human potential and human nature and human, the unconscious, right? The hidden, the unknown, which is why I was so passionate about hypnosis from the beginning. So that's where the overlap really comes in. However, what I discovered is that the mainstream, now it's obvious to me, back then it was a shock, yes, that the mainstream psychological field is not really open, definitely wasn't in my time when I graduated, to the spiritual world. Now they're getting better with energy psychology, but even that depends on the psychologist, I guess. So the field itself was not very open into accepting and integrating spirituality. So in terms of hypnosis, the field itself made it clear that there has to be a separation. And there's clinical hypnosis, therapeutic hypnosis, but that's not spiritual hypnosis. That if somebody came to me and said, "Oh, can you do a past life regression?" Well, the American Psychological Association instructed us to say, "No, there's no such thing." Now, maybe today would be different. I don't know. But that was the instruction I got, I think it was 13 years ago now, being trained in hypnosis and clinical hypnosis. So I really realized pretty quickly that if I wanted to follow my passion of spirituality and of holistic psychology that's really holistic because it includes spirituality, that I couldn't stay in the mainstream field. So I really had to part my way, which took a lot of conviction It was quite a difficult decision at the time after 11 years of school. And you can imagine student loans. And after all of that, to make the decision to really dedicate myself to that spiritual path and part ways with the clinical world. So there is an overlap, especially when you talk about the interest in the true nature of humans. But in terms of the official mainstream clinical field, it's not very open to it. Not yet, anyway. It's getting better and better and better, but not yet. So it really had me choose, which you would think is a bad thing, but on the other way, in another way to think about it, it made me commit, right? So because I couldn't combine both, so it couldn't just be a hobby. So I couldn't be a mainstream psychologist and also be interested in all the spiritual stuff. Really had to choose and commit myself, and so I decided not to be affiliated with the American Psychological Association, which meant no testing and evaluations, which is where the most money is in psychology. And I said, it's okay. Instead, I'm going to follow my heart. So I started offering hypnosis, spiritual hypnosis and therapeutic hypnosis, all types of hypnosis. And at the same time, I started working on my intuition and developing my psychic ability. So I started meditating every day. I started going to the Monroe Institute. I started reading about different topics, mediumship and lucid dreaming, and just really saturate myself in the spiritual world. And I rented an office in a spiritual shop when they were selling crystals and stuff like that. So that's where my first office was, practicing psychology. But then I started integrating energy work and readings into my practice. I actually had to leave that place so I can start offering more spiritual services because the shop owner didn't want me to compete with her services. So I had to leave there and opened completely my own place. And that pushed me even more towards just doing what I want. And I really started focusing on psychic readings and energy work then. And then COVID hit and the COVID shutdowns happened. And I closed my office. And I signed up. It was reversed order, but it's okay. I signed up for a channeling training. And I really dedicated myself to the practice of channeling. And we're talking, and not exaggerating, literal hours every day. Body work exercises and breath work exercises and different meditations. And of course, channeling practices and all these different practices to build up my energy, to build up my practice, and to really explore the full gamut of this practice of channeling. And that was 5.5 years ago now. It's amazing how time keeps on slipping and slipping and slipping. And that just has become my life. And it still is. So it's still a big part of my work and of my personal life. So I still have my Sunday group where we meet every single week and I channel Hathor, and the group gets to ask questions. And I still have individual clients, and I also teach channeling and light language. And we didn't even talk about light language, which was the latest edition. That took me the longest to grow comfortable with because that was the woo-west of all the journey and development. So that was an latest edition. We're still talking 3 years ago or so. But it took me some time to become comfortable with it.
So, well, what an incredible story and what a transformation. Speaking of becoming comfortable with it, when was the moment for you that it kind of clicked, that you knew, okay, I'm channeling something real. This is a real message that is meant to help people transform whatever that is? Because I think, especially coming from a psychology background, I'm sure there was some moments of doubt, right? Am I imagining all of this? Is
Yes,
this real, right? I mean, is this real is really
absolutely.
a complicated question.
Absolutely.
But can you talk about that part?
Yeah, so first of all, I had some preparation for the trust issue because I was already giving psychic readings for maybe 6 years at a time. So I already had some experience with that. Do you trust that voice? Do you not trust the voice? How do you know if it's imagination? And also the idea of getting validation from others. So when I do readings, but readings, it's easier to get validation. It's very quick because you talk about very practical stuff. But the idea of, again, of getting validation of how it feels when you're getting something versus when you're making something up. So I had some preparation for it. But some preparation does not mean fully being prepared, because just like any beginner channelers, and it's really true with anyone, there were a lot of questions of doubt. And is it really real? How do you really know? And the truth is that to some degree, you don't really know, because it could be real. And you said something very wise, right? What is real? It could be real mixed with our imaginations and impressions. It's really not black and white like people think. That's why being a channeler really means doing a lot of inner work to constantly be clear and being centered, um, and being aware of your own emotions and your own thoughts and your own opinions. So it's much takes a lot of focus. Am I answering the question?
Yes. And can we take it like one step a little more practical? I love grounding some of those big concepts in reality. For people who are listening right now who are not necessarily looking to become channels, but they're really resonating with this idea of having those intuitive thoughts or some channel thoughts that can maybe help them in their everyday life. I feel like myself as an entrepreneur, I'm always like attuned to the space and different ideas that come to me in meditations. Do you have quick ways to know when something is real, when something is for you, when this download you're getting is really, you need to pay attention versus something that just kind of like another thought in your head?
Yeah, practice makes perfect. I know it's not the answer that people want. People want something fast and easy. They want an answer. So like, oh, so that's what I do. Great. But it's much, we're talking about the subtle world and subtle senses and subtle energy. And there's a reason it's called subtle. It's very subtle. So it takes practice. And over time, and that really also to answer your previous question, what's the one moment that I knew? In terms of the channeling, it is a gradual, over time validation and assurance rather than one moment of proof. And it's the same for generally intuition. And you don't have to become a channeler. So I mentioned that I teach channeling. So I teach light language. But the people that take my class, their aspiration is not to become a singer or a light language practitioner. It is to learn to become a clear channel, learn to recognize, we're talking about those subtle senses, learning to recognize that flow, that energy, and learning then to hold that space, and then learning to be comfortable with your voice and express it, letting go of the ego and express the energy with your voice. So that's really what we're talking about. And when you talk about it in this way, you really benefit from becoming a better channel or better intuitive for any artistic endeavor. So maybe you're a painter, or maybe you like drawing, or maybe you are a singer, or you like making music, or maybe you just like dancing and the way you're expressing the music with your body, anything, or you're an athlete. I actually work with athletes for peak performance. Whether you're an athlete, these are all different ideas of being in the zone, being in that, again, if you call it channeling or you call it being in the zone, or however you want to understand it, it's still that same state. So it doesn't matter what your journey is, you would benefit from connecting in that way.
No, that's incredible. And thank you for bringing it, for grounding this concept, especially mentioning like athletes and all those examples, I think really demystify some of the woo aspects that often get misunderstood. And there's a lot of stereotypes around it. And one thing that also came to mind, I think most people these days can understand the flow state and peak performance and all those terms. And I love kind of bringing that into this conversation. But I do still think one of the main stigmas around this is this idea that you're being like possessed or overtaken by another being, and potential dangers of that, and what is the intention. So it just comes with a whole mixed bag of emotions, right? So can you talk about that?
It doesn't matter what you talk about, there are going to be fear conversations. And also, it doesn't matter what you talk about, there's going to be a need for discernment. So, these are two important points. So, on one hand, again, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. You want to be aware where your conversations are coming from. And if they're coming out of fear, this is not necessarily the voice that you want to listen to and act from. And any conversation of saying, and that's where discernment versus fear comes. If you're saying, oh no, any channeled messages, any spiritual messages, this is all the devil, this is all Satan. Okay, that's obviously fear. There's obviously lack of openness, a lack of willingness to be discerning. However, if you're saying, I don't know, some of these messages can be bad for me, you can hear the difference. That one sounds very extreme. You can hear the difference in the version of the fear versus discernment. And the second version, some of this message may be nonsense. Some of these messages may be bad for me. Some of these messages may be made up. That is true. That is why you need to stay grounded. That is why you need to stay discerning. That is why you need to trust yourself above and beyond. And even that doesn't mean that what you're thinking is the ultimate truth, because we need room to grow too, right? So what we once thought was the ultimate truth, we change our mind and we grew from that. So even that, there's flexibility. However, the bottom line is still what resonates as truth to you. Both the person that is speaking, the source that you're hearing, and the actual messages. Does it sound truth? Does it sound like it's uplifting? Does it sound like it's helpful in any way? And if it doesn't, put it aside. That's okay. But you have to stay discerning. You have to stay grounded. And even if you're hearing it from anyone, you're hearing a message from the ultimate point of authority and truth, you still need the bottom line to be your own discernment. So that is what I say to even the most skeptical person. Keep your discernment. Nobody is asking you to throw it out the window, because your discernment is your best friend. But you also want to be open, because if everything is a no, you're not leaving much room for growth and much room for fun.
I love that message, and this is so helpful. And obviously, you very skilled in handling those conversations because I can imagine they come up a lot in the body of work that you do.
Absolutely.
We're running out of time. I feel like we could talk forever. Hopefully, this conversation made people a little more open to try channeling or listen or read a book. And I've read quite a few books of channelers, and I always find incredible wisdom. So I highly encourage people. And I think you were spot on in terms of using your own intuition, knowing what's right for you. That to me, this is absolutely filter that I use when you said, see if it's uplifting. Like to me, those are the messages, and it doesn't need to be sugar coated. It doesn't need to be some, cheesy words of encouragement. But if the message that I'm hearing is that, does that, how does it make me feel, right? And
Exactly.
if it makes me feel uplifted, inspired, curious, this is what I'm looking for. And this is always like a true compass, and we all know what we feel. So that's like an easy compass to go by. So I highly encourage people to give it a shot and explore. And any last words of wisdom to people that are curious about it? Maybe you want to learn from you, maybe take a step further, or where do people even start with channeling? What would be your recommendations?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I teach channeling. So if you're curious about that, and specifically I teach light language, which really just means channeling with your voice, but not in English. So you're not speaking English, you're just making sounds. So it's just pure creativity. So yes, so I mentioned that I teach channeling, but if you don't have to want to become a channeler, you can just be curious and want to learn how to be in that space. So my recent book, Conversations with Hathor, one of the things that I love about it, that it's perfect for anyone that's curious and interested, but especially for anyone that's interested in channeling, because it really documents my journey with Hathor. And she's one of the first sources that I channeled while I was still in the training, while I didn't know who I was channeling. And because of that, a lot of the first sessions had to do with trust, and the other trainees learning how to channel were asking questions about how do I know how to trust and how do I know discernment. And so it's a really, really good book for the basics, for the ABC of learning how to open to channel, learning how to discern the different energies, and then learning about Hathor and their nature and how they've been interacting with humanity in ancient Egypt and now. And I mean, this is the end of the show, but if we start there, it's a whole other show. 3 books just about Hathor. But that book captures so well the journey of learning to channel and opening to channel that I really, really recommend it for people that are interested in channeling and in connecting intuitively in general. And I guess I should mention my website, which is YafiChanneling.com. So Yafi, my first name, YAFI, channeling.com. And there you have links to my books, which are also on Amazon, but also on my website, and my services and my groups and my classes and everything.
Great. We'll put everything in show notes as well. Well, Yafi, this was such a pleasure. Thank you for this enlightening conversation. I really feel like I learned a lot about this mysterious art of channeling, and I love your background and your journey and your brave commitment to this path. So please keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.